Should you buy Albion Online? No, don't. Now, I've played this addictive Skinnerbox whale hunt game for about 48 hours of my life that I'll never get back because I don't have a job and I have addictive personality tendencies. So, take it from me, you do not want to play or buy this game. It's not good. It's okay. It could be fun, but right now, it's not. Which is a shame, because Albion Online should be a lot of fun. But Albion Online ends up being just another sandbox game that's all box and no sand. Albion Online should be a good game. It has simple and responsive MOBA-style mechanics. Of course, there's some rough edges that I'll talk about later. Albion also has the grind and open-level mechanics of multiplayer Diablo or Path of Exile, and it's scaled way up. And on top of all of that, Albion has a compelling metagame like EVE Online. It has the player-driven economic engine for all items that are used. It has full loot in a lot of the zones, any zone that's really worth doing. It has one open server, and it has territories for guilds and alliances to fight over. You can do a lot of things in a big group. You combine all those things together and it sounds pretty good. So what's the problem? Well, Albion Online really is just an addictive chore. And I'll explain what I'm talking about. Fame progression is important. Being further ahead gives you a significant advantage in the abilities you can use, and you get flat bonuses to everything you do in the game. So since Albion is a competitive game with all those guild versus guild territory rewards that give you significant advantages, if you're not grinding fame, you're falling behind. If you're not grinding money, you're falling behind. By working on this video, I'm not working on progressing my character so that I might hopefully get into the content I want to play and not get absolutely bodied by the people who've grinded longer and they just have higher stats, they do more damage, they take less damage, and that just isn't fun, that's addictive. And you know what, that would be fine, but most of what you do to grind right now in Albion Online is gather resources, sometimes in the black zone, where you might get some PvP and run away, and that can be really fun, but most of the time you're doing it in yellow zone because then you don't, waste your time dying, and then of course run expeditions. And I've been doing that for a couple days, and it's boring. I've done all of them, and unfortunately that's the most efficient way to progress, and since, I have other things to do in my life besides play this game, I want to do the most efficient thing to progress, because then I can spend more time playing the game that I want to play. A lot of the more end-game things that are taking a really long time to get into, you gotta just grind to get there, and since the grind sucks, the game sucks. While I can't recommend it for the price, the game isn't terrible. Albion is mouse movement, but it's okay. My only issue is how often you get stuck. There's no pathfinding at all, so you will get stuck on stuff. And since the maps aren't really optimized, if the devs cleaned up some corners and they made the non-traversable areas much more obvious compared to traversable ones that are very similar, you wouldn't get stuck as much. So when I was playing, I found when I got to new areas, I often had issues with bridges or pawns that looked like the boundary, and I didn't know at first glance if I'd get stuck on something or not, and if I'm running away from somebody, that's really important. But once you get used to the area, and you get used to how the controls work, and how to kind of manipulate around objects so you don't get stuck on corners, it's fine. It is mouse movement, so you will click on stuff that you don't want to, and your character will happily follow the instructions, and you'll probably die or just waste some time, but that's just kind of mouse movement for you. Now, combat. Albion Online's combat is why I tried it out. It's fun, and the fact that it can happen most places, pretty much any time, is awesome. Even if you're just skinning, or some mundane task out in the black zone, if you're trying to avoid hostile players, it's so much more fun. The cat and mouse mechanics are pretty good. They're really working out on the balance, but right now, it's fun sometimes. And when I would run dungeons with the guild, having the transition from PvE clearing mode to fighting another group at any time was a lot of fun. And also having the option to kill other groups that are farming the same area as you is always great. Items you wear each have their own spells and abilities that you can choose from, which is really cool. This gives the players choice in what loadout and abilities they want to run. They can kind of min-max or do some unconventional stuff. You can pull a lot of interesting synergies. Of course, when you have such an open-ended system, balance is a problem. There's some very strong flavor of the month compositions and builds, but the first patch coming down the pipeline is a balance patch, and they're going to be continually trying stuff out, letting the meta evolve. So it's not stale, it's still interesting, and it's a lot of fun. Now, the world design is repetitive and mostly filler. There's only really 4 monster factions, and they're really kind of upscaled, copy-pasted. All the movesets are very samey. which the simplicity is nice because you can really kind of get the PvE mechanics quickly, and there's a little bit of depth, especially if you're trying to avoid other players and you are targeting mobs, and you don't have to kind of look up the build to beat the dungeon. But also, if you're looking for strategic depth, like you're a raider and you want some really complex PvE content, this is a very PvP-focused game. The PvE is really just there to motivate players to go to zones to fight each other. And while a lot of the biomes are very samey and could probably just be cut and you wouldn't even notice, there's some really cool areas. Most of the world boss zones, or the red zones right around Carleon, are really cool. They have a lot of attention to detail, but you can really tell the zones that the mappers spent much more time on, because especially when you're starting out, the starting zones all look the same, and they're pretty boring. And the cities, some of the cities that I've only looked at once are kind of interesting, but you only look at them once to move on to Carleon because of how the map's designed. Everything's in the central hub, which is great because it's efficient, but it's kind of too efficient for an open world game, so everybody just kind of sits in Carleon, and you're not going to really have any motivation to explore anything. So I mean, the design's okay, it has some interesting elements, but it's not, spectacular. Now Albion lets you play Farmville, and has a lot of daily set objectives where you get bonuses, and you can run your farms, and you have your laborers. But if you played any kind of mobile game that has stamina-based features, you've played this. It's kind of tacked on as a money sink for new players because they think they'll invest and get a long-term return. But really, it's just kind of your daily chore to keep people logging on every day because otherwise there's no reason to. There's also some cool stuff with guild mechanics and buying city plots, and you can charge taxes for players to use them. And if you win the guild versus guild content for, say, Carleon, you can get like a flat tax rate, which is pretty cool. And that really leads us into conquerable territory, where buying plots and competing over, say, city plots is kind of unachievable for most players, considering how the auction system works. There's some really cool content where you can use 5v5 competitive matches to take over territory that you can use in the world, which is interesting. But maybe I'm missing something, but it appears you can't get a whole lot from them. Like, one of my guilds has territory, and we don't really care. We don't really want to defend it. We only kind of use it as a safe spot. Which, when I come from EVE, and nullsec territory there's very, very important, and there's a lot of incentives and cool things you can do with it, but Albion just needs some updates or rethinking or restructuring, because it just seems kind of tacked on, and it doesn't really motivate me to care. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense for a game which motivates kind of Zerg versus Zerg, or Blob versus Blob, large group fights, and then to capture the objective, you have a scheduled 5v5 battle. It doesn't make sense, because then you could lose the 5v5 battle, but then bring your bigger Zerg, and then just keep that guild from using it, which doesn't line up with the actual holding of the territory. It feels artificial. I'm not a big fan of it. All in all, I mean, Albion's good, but it needs work. It's just another open world game that sells the open world as its primary driver, but there's no real point to it. It's mostly grindy filler. There's a lot of interesting, good, different systems, but they feel separate and disjointed. The UI I didn't talk about, but it's functional, it works, it looks okay. It's a little clunky, it needs some quality of life updates where they could take out steps that don't need to be there, or weird things that you can't open certain menus when you have other menus open. Small little nitpicky things like that. There are some interesting patches coming out in the following months. They're already scheduled. I talked about the balance update that's going to bring arena PvP. But in my opinion, adding another instanced area, I already complained about expeditions, and those are instance content. And adding an arena that's instanced, that where you just sit in Carleon and queue in, isn't going to help a lot of the problems the game has, in my opinion. And I just don't see why I should play this over, say, League of Legends or Dota 2, because I'm going to get the same arena 5v5 there, and it's much more polished and better, and free. I'm bored with it after a week, and most players I talk to are as well. So I'd check it out if it goes on sale, if it goes free to play, or if they have some major content updates and there's some cool systems to kind of tie it all together. But right now, it's not worth $30. It's barely worth $15. If you really like RuneScape or Darkscape, this is kind of that, but it's not really as good in my opinion.